the Denver Broncos and pass rusher Nik Bonitto finally come to an agreement on a contract extension before the Week 1 matchup against the Tennessee Titans. And does Sean Payton now have all of the tools necessary to turn his and your Denver Broncos into legitimate AFC contenders? All things to come on today's rundown, but we have to begin in the NFL, where we got massive breaking news yesterday afternoon, right around 3 p.m. here, local time in Colorado, that Micah Parsons, the standout edge rusher for the Dallas Cowboys, has been traded to the Green Bay Packers in a haul that, interestingly enough, could be viewed as a win for both sides. The Packers receive Micah Parsons, and the Cowboys in return get a pair of first-round picks in this upcoming and next draft, and three-time Pro Bowl defensive tackle Kenny Clark. So you get a 2026 first, a 2027 first, a very, very capable defensive tackle in Kenny Clark, coming back to the Cowboys in exchange for a pass rusher who was clearly at odds with his owner and team in Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys. This saga has played out for the majority of the offseason, and really up until it came down yesterday, the overwhelming sentiment was there's no way that the Dallas Cowboys move on from a guy like Micah Parsons. All he's done is walk into the league and over 5 seasons or so been nothing but a Pro Bowler and an all-pro level player. He's got more than 50 sacks in this early stretch of his career, and that is why he gets traded to Green Bay and immediately signs a 4-year, $188 million contract extension with north of $120 million guaranteed, upwards of $130 million guaranteed, all of which are records in terms of contracts for non-quarterbacks. And this is a move that clearly signals the Green Bay Packers are in a win-now Super Bowl window in their own eyes. They have what they believe is a franchise quarterback in Jordan Love, and they've been able to amass pieces from Josh Jacobs to Jaden Reed and Matthew Golden in this year's draft on offense around him, as well as building a defensive front that is now headlined by Micah Parsons coming off of the edge. And for the Dallas Cowboys, there is a sentiment that you don't trade star quarterbacks and you don't trade star pass rushers in the NFL, because they are the two most difficult positions to find elite level talent at and then hold on to that elite level talent amidst your roster construction. That being said, if they really weren't going to pay Micah Parsons that much, and you can get into the nuance and the argument of whether or not they should or shouldn't have done that, getting a pair of first-round picks, even if they're later-round picks because the Packers factor to be a playoff contending team, and a defensive tackle while locking down your quarterback and several other pieces on the roster, it could be a situation where the Cowboys come out from this not unscathed per se, but equipped with enough ammunition to be able to reload and perhaps reset the clock on a pass rusher that, ironically, they will hope turns out a lot like Micah Parsons did. I think there were stylistic and personality differences between the Dallas Cowboys with Jerry Jones and Micah Parsons and his agent, and there was talks and whispers of handshake agreements that were then reneged and turned around on, and it just felt like that wasn't going to be reconcilable or resolvable prior to the start of the regular season, in which teams have to really begin to buckle down and do their business. And this conversation sparked some intrigue here locally about the timeline and maybe the urgency to get a deal done with Nik Bonitto. George Payton spoke to the media yesterday morning about the Nik Bonitto contract extension, and he said that they've done a good job of keeping things quiet on the Nik Bonitto contract front thus far, and they intend to keep it that way. And that really has been kind of a theme for this offseason, as we saw contract extensions and negotiations come down for Cortland Sutton, for Zach Allen, not necessarily in that order. And then the eventual, what we expect to come for Nik Bonitto. But mum has been the word from team and from player on all of these negotiations. And I think that is a testament and indicative of the culture that Sean Payton is reestablishing alongside George Payton here in Broncos country. So will the Broncos get a deal done with Nik Bonitto before week 1? It remains to be seen. We are closing in on, we are essentially we're almost over a week from the start of the 2025 regular season for the Broncos with that home opener against the Titans. And we have not heard anything on that front yet. George Payton still keeping his lips firmly sealed on that regard. And it seems to be comfortably so with that approach from both sides. The question is, should they? And how does this Micah Parsons extension and trade impact the potential market for pass rushers and thus the negotiations between George Payton and Sean Payton and Nik Bonitto's company? I really don't think it impacts it all that much. I had a similar philosophy and logic to say, hey, if the Broncos were to push Nik Bonitto's contract extensions into the season, whether that was in the first month, leading up to the trade deadline, or later in the season, I would not fault them for going to do that, because prior to Nik Bonitto's 13.5 sack season last year, where he was not top 3 in sacks in the NFL, and the Broncos as a team were certainly prolific in that specific defensive category, Nik Bonitto had been on an ascending trajectory, but not one that would make you say, hey, we expect 13.5 sacks pretty reasonably from a guy like this year in and year out, the way you would for a Micah Parsons, because he has put it on record and has a track record of it for 4+ seasons in the NFL already. And that is why I don't think that the trade between the Cowboys and the Packers and the subsequent extension by Green Bay to lock Micah Parsons down to that 4-year, $188 million contract with north of $130 million in total guarantees ultimately impacts Nik Bonitto's discussion all that much. Because, and I say this with the utmost amount of respect for a guy like Nik Bonitto, we're talking about different categories here. You can say, hey, well, if the top of the market rises, then the floor at the bottom of that market also gets a little bit of a lift. And there have been instances where that is true. But given the way that these negotiations have come all the way down the pipe throughout the course of this offseason, I don't think a contract extension for Micah Parsons with the Green Bay Packers suddenly shakes up the game board to a degree where Micah Parsons and his agent come back to the Broncos and say, whoa, well, that was then. This is now. It was always forecasted that Micah Parsons was going to get his extension this offseason, whether it was with the Cowboys or another team, in this case, the Green Bay Packers. And there are tiers and levels to the pass rusher category, of which Micah Parsons and Nik Bonitto, just at this moment in time, are not next to each other, if that makes sense. And so will this contract extension prevent the Broncos or discourage Nik Bonitto's camp maybe from signing a deal before the start of the season because they want to renegotiate for more money? I don't have any reporting on the subject, but my gut would tell me and my instinct would tell me, no, it will not. And we will see a contract extension, I believe, for Nik Bonitto before the game against the Tennessee Titans, which will allow him to go out on the field in the regular season when the games finally count and have a clear mind and a peace of mind and comfort that says that he can go out and achieve these things again without the risk and the worry of potentially injuring himself and forfeiting future earnings. When we're looking at the Denver Broncos roster from a more macro perspective, if we zoom out a little bit, we all can hearken back to the comments that Sean Payton made about this Denver Broncos team in 2025, where he expressed how much he loves the makeup and the composition of this team. From a depth perspective, he clearly feels like he has a connection with Bo Nix and his ability to kind of lead this team back into the tradition of winning that it had experienced for so long prior to the departure of Pat Bowlen and the eventual decline after Super Bowl 50. He said it was one of 7 teams that he's ever coached in his coaching career at the NFL level that he felt like could win a Super Bowl. He went on to pump up Bo Nix and say that Bo Nix, he believes, is a top 5 quarterback, top 4 quarterback, perhaps, in the very near future. And for all of those things to happen, it can't be done alone. Bo Nix can't do it alone. Sean Payton can't do it with just success in one position group or the other. So it comes down to the composition of the roster as a whole. We saw a massive overhaul of the skill position department during this offseason. They draft RJ Harvey and Pat Bryant in the wide receiver and running back room. They signed J.K. Dobbins. You have an emergence of talent at the tight end position with the acquisition of Evan Ingram to be your joker on offense, that role that Sean Payton loves, to be able to just move around on his chessboard and create advantageous matchups on a series-to-series and week-to-week basis. And then you have a fortification on the defensive side of the ball with extensions for Zach Allen, and they extended DJ Jones prior to that. And you have Patrick Surtain. They draft Jahdae Barron. You have a returning Riley Moss and Jaquan McMillan in the secondary. They bring in Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw. So the overhaul from a talent perspective on both sides of the roster was significant for this Broncos squad in 2025, which begs the question, does Sean Payton now have all of the tools necessary in order to have the vision that he sees of this team as a Super Bowl winning group of players and Bo Nix as a potential top 4 or 5 quarterback in the National Football League? Are all of the tools now in place for him to do that? I think if you're looking outside in, the argument is certainly stronger in 2025 than it was in 2024. But that is not, as evidenced by some of their favoritism on the 53-man roster that they cut down to this week, and the words of George Payton, who spoke to the media this week, how they look at it. And I appreciate the perspective that George laid out. On that conference call with the Denver media, he said, "We're trying to keep the best 53. We've talked a lot about building through the trenches. We felt all 7 interior defensive linemen were really good players. That's how we won last year, and that's how we want to win this year. Offensive and defensive line. So shame on us if we were to get rid of a really good defensive line player." This obviously comes with the announcement in the news with the 53-man roster finalization, at least in an initial sense, that 7 interior defensive linemen, including both Inyoma Uwazurike and Jordan Jackson, make this Broncos roster, and a clear signal from George Payton, Sean Payton, that they are emphasizing and anchoring the talent in that room with so many defensive linemen leading into this preseason that were up for contract renewals at the end of the 2025 season. They feel confident in the talent that they have drafted and developed behind some of these guys. They locked down Zach Allen and DJ Jones for future years to come. And so for the likes of John Franklin Myers and Malcolm Roach, who all have expiring contracts in the near future, they have plans and security in place. And then you look at the offensive line, the way that they've done that. They invested in that early on. George Payton did in recent years, bringing in Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers to go along with Wattenberg as a draft and develop prospect, and Garrett Bowles, who is now one of the longest standing bastions of Broncos football, coming in the 2017 draft. And then you have one of the best guards in the National Football League in Quinn Miners, who is a success story from a draft and development perspective for George Payton. So the Denver Broncos did a ton of work from the outside in to retool and revamp their roster on both sides of the ball. They addressed the running back and wide receiver positions. They brought in a dynamic playmaking tight end. They added depth to their secondary. They brought in safety and linebacker help. And now it appears they can do that because they felt confident in the work they'd done in the trenches to fortify the offensive and defensive lines. And George Payton's philosophy, talking about building from the trenches, inside out, and finding that as the way they won last year and want to continue to win this year, feels to me like a legitimate and savvy recipe for success that I think will pay dividends for the Broncos in both areas that really need it, because all of these parts work complementary together. The quarterback in Bo Nix needs time to throw the ball, and the running backs in RJ Harvey and J.K. Dobbins need space to be able to operate from, to break free into the open field. And the offensive line, who we still have some questions about from a run blocking perspective, and this preseason didn't exactly do a lot to alleviate those concerns, but they have a plan in place, and they have personnel and a scheme and a system transitioning to more of an outside zone run scheme that should put them in a position to be successful. And from the defensive side of the ball, this Broncos defense carried Bo Nix in the offense through the first month or so of the season while the young quarterback got his feet wet and tried to find footing at the NFL level. And that is going to not necessarily have to be the exact same situation in 2025, because I expect Bo Nix to have a much faster start to his 2025 season than he did in 2024. But the importance of controlling the line of scrimmage from a defensive perspective, combined with what we hope to be top tier level pass rushing from a guy like Nik Bonitto, who should be extended in the very near future, and Jonathan Cooper on the opposite side, with quality depth in those rooms as well, from the likes of Jonah Ellis and perhaps Q Robinson and even Savion Jones on the interior, along with a vaunted secondary and what we hope to be a healthy and functioning, potentially snap counted inside linebacker room. That pressure from the interior on the defensive front is going to be something that helps Vance Joseph and this Broncos defense control the clock and control games as well as they did on the early portions and stretches of the 2024 season. We say all of that to say the CU Buffs are just hours away from kicking off their 2025 season with the Georgia Tech coming to Folsom Field in a game that I think is going to be an interesting litmus test for this Buff squad and what their expectations, ceiling, and projection should be for the 2025 season. Will they experience some regression with the fall off of Shedeur Sanders leaving for the NFL, Travis Hunter, your two-way Heisman Trophy winning unicorn, leaving for the NFL, a wide receiver room that was loaded with NFL talent from Xavier Weaver and Jimmy Horn and LeJontay Wester alongside Travis Hunter, and then the urgency and the need to run the football. They had some key departures in that room as well, with some hopeful additions that they hope can spark more life into the offense than it was present in 2024. And tonight's game against a mobile quarterback for Georgia Tech, with potential quarterback rotation going on for the Buffs, as Caden Salter announced the starter, but Julian Lewis, according to Coach Prime, in good standing with the team and somebody that they hope they can implement packages for going into even this game tonight. We will see how that dynamic plays out. I've been on the record saying I don't love both quarterbacks playing simultaneously and creating that like Kirk Cousins, Marcus Mariota, Drew Brees, Taysom Hill type dynamic, especially because the quarterback that you typically create packages for is the running quarterback like Caden Salter would be, not necessarily the pure pocket passer like Julian Lewis. So I'm fascinated to see how this dynamic shakes out. And year 3 of Coach Prime's tenure here with the Colorado Buffaloes could and should, in my opinion, come with expectations of competing for a Big 12 championship appearance and hopefully a seat at the table at the college football playoff. Is that maybe the most realistic projection given the current state of their roster? Maybe not. But at the same time, college football is now in this Wild West format with NIL and transfer portal chaos, not something that is ever going to wait for you. So it is the responsibility of Coach Prime and the staff in Boulder to do what they need to do to put themselves in those positions to compete as the landscape continues to shift. Regression is something that every team in college football has to fight through. And the top tier programs, of which CU, by bringing in Coach Prime, wants to be a part of, find ways to mitigate those changes and keep things moving at a steady, productive, and forward trajectory. We will keep an eye on all things going tonight up in Boulder, as well as a massive weekend of college football that will kick off the true beginning of football season before the NFL gets going next weekend. Stay locked into Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan and DenverSports.com for all of your sports, entertainment, and news needs. And give us a like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow our social channels where you can view programs like this one, The Rundown, Denver Sports Daily, Orange and Blue Today with the one and only Andrew Mason and Cecil Lammy. And we will have it all ready, packaged in a bow for you on Tuesday at noon.
I do what I love what I do. It's second nature to put in the work.